Today we're going to be making an Italian cream cake. I've already beaten the egg whites so that they form soft peaks. You don't want them too stiff. Now we'll be creaming the butter and the Crisco. Start out on low speed and then go to medium. Back it down to low speed again and add your sugar. About a cup at a time. Then bump it up. Back down and add the rest of your sugar. Make sure it's well creamed together. Then put your mixer back down and begin to add your egg yolks. One at a time. If one of them has broken, then make sure you use your scraper, rubber scraper, to get all the egg yolks in there. Get that nice and fluffy. Make sure it's all mixed. Now I will begin to add the buttermilk and the dry ingredients alternately. I always start with buttermilk, about a third of what I have. Do this on low speed or you'll have a mess on yourself and in the kitchen. And you can bump it up just a little. As it's mixing, turn off the beater and add your dry ingredients, about a third of those. Incorporate those. Start out at slow speed. Add everything in on a low speed. Some more dry. Mix that well. Add some more buttermilk. And then finish up with the rest of your dry ingredients. I always like to end with the rest of the buttermilk, but it doesn't really matter. Make sure that you use baking soda and not baking powder. And I had already mixed the salt and the baking soda in with the flour. Once that's well mixed, add your vanilla, again on low speed. Mix that up well. Back it down to low speed and add your pecans. And your coconut. Mix it really well. Make sure you scrape down the beater. Add your egg whites. And fold those into the batter. Try not to stir. Folding is an up and down motion that crosses over the top. It's like a cutting motion. This type of addition, this method, will keep the egg whites from breaking down too much. If you use the mixer or just stir it in, then they break down and they don't create that nice texture that we want in our cake. Once you have all that incorporated, then it's time to move over and put this in to the pans. Try to evenly distribute the batter among your 3 9-inch pans that have been sprayed and lined with wax paper. You can probably use parchment paper, but wax paper is less expensive. Spread it out. And I like to tap the pans on a hard surface because that will get rid of air bubbles. And into the 350-degree oven it goes. I usually only do 3 pans at a time. And let that bake for 25 to 30 minutes. Looks like our cakes are ready to come out of the oven. Now remember, these cakes will not be tall. These layers will not be tall. This is a dense cake batter. The next step is really important. These have to be turned out immediately. Run a knife around the outside edge. Flop it over onto your foil. Pull the lining off the wax paper. If you don't do this right away, then you'll have a mess. And they'll stick in the pan. We don't want that. And one more. Running the knife around the pan helps to loosen it from the side of the pan. Third one. When these have cooled sufficiently, usually anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes, then you can wrap them in the foil and freeze the layers. Make sure, one other step that I always do is to mark the cakes with a number, the same number. That way you know all of that batter from that bowl are in these layers. And that's it. I'm baking the cake. There we go. Now we're going to make the icing for the Italian cream cake. I always make a double batch because my mixer will hold that. So I have the cream cheese and the butter in the mixer already. We'll start it out on low and then move it to medium speed. Get it nice and fluffy. Add the vanilla. Usually a couple capfuls is equal to a teaspoon of vanilla, so put in 4 of those. Get that whipped really good. There's no moisture in this, no milk, no water. Begin to add the powdered sugar. A little at a time. Make sure your mixer's on low or you'll lose your kitchen in a cloud of powdered sugar. And do just a little at a time. Wait until that's incorporated pretty well. And add a little more. You can see I'm adding it in stages. All the time on low. One thing I forgot to mention when I was doing the cake, after you've sprayed your pans and put in the circles of wax paper, make sure you spray the wax paper too, so that it will peel off easily. Also, when you're freezing your cake layers, I like to freeze them separately, wrapped in the foil, before I stack them. This way they won't compress each other. And this is our last bit of powdered sugar. Whip that up. I always like to stop the mixer and scrape, even though I have one of those beaters on here that has the automatic scraper attached. I like to get in the very bottom and make sure that I get all of that powdered sugar mixed in. Once you have it nice and fluffy, then it's time to add your pecans. You can use a food processor or a chopper to chop your pecans. I don't suggest a blender because it can get too fine. You want those nice pieces. Get that all mixed in. Scrape it down a little bit. And that's that for the icing. Okay, now we're going to ice our cake. First thing we need to do is spread just a little bit of icing on the board. That acts as the glue. Unwrap your cakes. I start out with the first layer, top up. By the way, the board that I'm using is waxed. Takes about, anywhere from a half to 3/4 cup icing between each layer. You don't need too much because it's a very rich icing. Just enough. Okay. The next layer is on there, top side down. If your board is not waxed, you will need to put a piece of saran wrap or plastic wrap down before you start putting the cakes on there. If you don't, then the moisture from the cake will make a mess on the board. And now the third layer, the top up. And now we start at the sides. If you have a turntable, this makes it a little bit easier to maneuver. This is a fairly thin layer that goes on the sides. Remember, this is a very rich icing. Work as quickly as you can. Another tip, when you're completely done, make sure that you cover the cake. Either put it in a box, or if you're using a cake carrier. This way, as it defrosts, the moisture goes back into the cake and not out into the air. to the end. Now, the icing that we have left will go on the top. Spread that. Make sure you go clear to the edges. You can also freeze this icing. Make it up ahead of time and freeze it in the amount that you'll need. And there we have it. 3 layers of gorgeous sweetness.